Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. For today's video, I actually wanted to offer some praise to one of the leaders of the Columbus Division of Police. The guy that you're looking at on your screen behind me, this is Assistant Chief Nicholas Convis. Nick Convis, as well as Chief Elaine Bryant, went to the Civilian Review Board meeting back in July. It was July the 2nd, 2024. Unfortunately, I've been wanting to make this video, but I'm just now finally finding the time to do it. They went to the Civilian Review Board meeting to kind of answer some questions about the process, this, that, and the other thing. And the Civilian Review Board kept asking them to offer some criticisms and critiques of their process. And I don't remember how long they spoke. I think they spoke for about an hour, maybe a little bit more than an hour. But you could see a tremendous amount of reluctance from the part of the chief and Assistant Chief Convis to offer criticisms. The reason for this is because I believe that there's an immense amount of political pressure on the chief and the assistant chiefs to pretend that the Civilian Review Board is doing a good job. That's my statement, to put it lightly. There's a lot of pressure on them to ignore reality and pretend that the Civilian Review Board is doing a good job, and that, you know, that everybody's happy with the Civilian Review Board. And as a matter of fact, I think the chief, I didn't highlight her statement there. I didn't clip it, but she actually did say that they're doing a good job. They just have some room for improvement, but she didn't offer kind of what room for improvement they have. This is where Assistant Chief Nick Convis comes in. And he actually had the courage, had the balls to stand up for what is right, and actually tell the Civilian Review Board what it is, probably what the biggest problem with them is. And the biggest problem with the Civilian Review Board is that they don't understand basic police concepts. I've covered this in multiple videos. I think the video that I just put out a couple of days ago, I highlighted the exact same thing. And what Assistant Chief Convis is going to do when he talks to them, he highlights the fact that they have a fundamental misunderstanding of case law in many cases. And he goes in through and he gives a couple of examples of that. It kind of cracked me up when I was watching it, because his thoughts on this subject mirror mine almost exactly. So myself and Assistant Chief Nick Convis are kind of in the same boat when it comes to the Civilian Review Board. And when I talk about the Civilian Review Board, I say, you know, having a Civilian Review Board take over your police department is much the same as allowing the commenters on YouTube and social media dictate what it is that your police department does. The reason I say that is because the commenters on YouTube and social media, they think they understand case law, but they're always out there kind of inappropriately or inaccurately quoting case law or interpreting it in a way that is actually not legally correct. And that is something that the Civilian Review Board does very frequently. They frequently demonstrate that they don't understand case law as well as the police officers understand it, and they're the ones trying to tell the police officers how to do their job. What this means at the end of the day is that very frequently the chain of command, people like Nick Convis here, are forced to overturn the findings of the Civilian Review Board, meaning that most of the work done by the Civilian Review Board is a complete waste of time, because they lack the basic knowledge required to analyze these complaints against police officers. And, you know, Assistant Chief Convis is going to have a little bit of a back and forth with Rich Nathan in this particular conversation. They talk about case law and the importance of knowing case law, and just the fact that the Civilian Review Board doesn't understand it. And I just wanted to make this video to come out and offer my support to Assistant Chief Nick Convis and say thank you. Thank you for going out there and saying the things that needed to be said, and not bowing down to the political pressure and just being a political pawn of kind of the powers that run the city, that showing that you actually have some integrity and you are still willing to stand up for what is right, rather than just being that person that's going to be a yes man that's doing what he's told. So thank you for Nick Convis for having this discussion at the Civilian Review Board. And for those of you who haven't seen it, you can watch now, and then I'm going to get out of the way. I'll see you guys later.
Now, one more question. I was just curious if you're seeing any patterns where you disagree. whether you think that, hey, the DIG and the Civilian Review Board are missing things that the chain of command is picking up, or where you find that the DIG and the Civilian Review Board are sustaining actions that you think, the chain of command is saying, no, that's unfounded. Are there some patterns? I mean, one of the things that would be helpful for us is to learn from this process. So if we're consistently missing something, so that we're consistently doing something that the chain of command is saying, we're not going to agree to this approach in one direction or the other, that would be really helpful for us to get that reflection. Now, maybe the cases are so individually tailored that, no, there's no pattern. But if there were some patterns or some lessons, that would be really helpful to get feedback, that we were able to, for the DIG's office to say, because we're generally agreeing with the DIG. So if there's something that is being overturned or added all the time, or, often, it'd be great for all of us to know what that was.
Okay. I think the big thing is that appears to be missing is an understanding of case law. And a lot of what we do, so we can only write policy to cover so many interactions. I wish we could train every possible scenario an officer would run into in the academy. It would be amazing, but we can't. And there are times, for instance, consensual encounters, where an officer doesn't have a legal reason to stop somebody, but under case law is allowed to engage in a consensual encounter with somebody that develops into a reason for that officer to stop them. And we encourage proactive policing. So sometimes I think some findings come out possibly that case law was not taken into consideration, where we might have a policy that is somewhat on point. For instance, our bias-based policing policy. And we have case law then that governs our interactions with them. And if there's a consensual encounter that is permissible under case law, our officers, we require them to follow case law. And our officers regularly get legal updates. That is one awesome thing we do, is we have an in-house legal advisor who provides consistent, every couple months, brand new cases coming out. So we are always on the cutting edge of what officers can and can't do. But I think sometimes that's not taken into consideration, and the chain of command will then find and recognize that and say, we can't agree with this because case law allows the officer to do what the officer did, and we expect them to follow. So I think kind of maybe an immersion in some case law might be something that would be helpful, because that's really, case law governs almost every one of our interactions with an individual. And then policy kind of governs in conjunction, but then also those things when we're not necessarily interacting with somebody in the public. And maybe you get a complaint that an officer didn't classify a report properly, or something of that nature. That would be, obviously, would fall back on policy.
Well, again, to the extent that you're not just observing something that's happening on a case-by-case basis, but rather you're seeing some patterns that we're missing, that this case governs this area, or, in one direction or another, it would be just helpful to have that reflection and say, gosh, you guys can improve. We don't have to keep going through this overturning or adding these charges that you're not getting. So I don't know if there is a pattern, but if there is, that would be helpful.
Yeah, again, I think that it would fall back to the case law has shown up in a couple different cases where it's come out sustained, but then we're like, well, case law points and allows us to do, our officers to do whatever it is that they did. So I don't know, possibly just reviewing some of that. And then obviously if we have a systemic issue with the investigation itself, whether it's a process issue or an interview issue or a questioning issue or scope issue, we will always reach out to the DIG and have that candid conversation, and that works very well.